Bonjour! Welcome back. For today's video, I'm going to talk about some of the differences between small towns and big cities in France. Also, some not so obvious differences. So to help me, I asked a friend currently living in Dijon to contribute. Miriam. She lives in a middle to large sized city, and since I've lived in both smaller towns and bigger cities in France, I thought I would tackle the small town side. Though if you are interested in Paris specifically, I do have some other videos on my channel covering that.
Hi, my name is Miriam and I'm a language assistant in France. This is my second time being a language assistant. The first time I worked at the primary level in a city called Angers in the Académie de Nantes, and the second year, which is this year, I'm working at the secondary level in the Académie de Dijon in the city of Dijon itself. Now, Angers and Dijon are pretty similar sized cities and pretty similar on paper. They would be considered medium to large cities. They're not as big as Paris or Lyon, but they are decently sized cities with public transport networks, museums, tourist things.
So I've lived in two different smaller towns ranging from 6,000 to about 10,000 people in the Aquitaine and also the Grand Est. And even though they are smaller towns, there's still so much to do and enjoy, and they offer really a truly unique experience that a larger city wouldn't. So this is no surprise, but there's no metros in small towns in France. However, they do usually have buses that go within the town or even from town to town. And this is the thing that really surprised me, was both of the small towns I was in, they both had train stations. So I was still able to easily travel. And if not, like, cars are much more common. You could even look into renting a car if you're only going to be here for a short term. However, it can get kind of pricey. And I've always been able to easily move around using the train, or even just if I have a friend who's going somewhere, just tagging along in their car. Also, BlaBlaCar is pretty accessible from a small town as well. BlaBlaCar is the ride-sharing website, so you can message those going on your same route and see if they can make a small detour to pick you up. A lot of times it's only like a few minute detour, so they're willing to do that.
In terms of public transportation, Angers and Dijon are pretty similar. So they both have extensive bus networks that run throughout the whole city and will also take you out into the suburbs. The only main difference really is that Angers has one tram line, whereas Dijon has two. Other than that, they have a tram that runs through the city and you can take that pretty effectively. They both have monthly transport passes available at a discount to those under 25. I paid 32 euros in Angers and 30 euros in Dijon. Of course, if you use public transportation as an assistant for your job, you are eligible for a 50% reimbursement on the amount that you paid. You just have to submit paperwork. It is important to note, though, that if you are like me and you live at your school and you only work at one school and you don't need public transportation for that school because you live there, you will unfortunately not be eligible for that reimbursement. The public transport networks, like I said, are extensive. They're really well connected. In both Angers and Dijon, I was able to use it to go grocery shopping, to do fun touristy things, to just explore the city, whenever I needed to go on any kind of errand, but they're both well connected and the public transport is really easy to use.
Along with big cities, for Paris specifically, it costs about 75 euros for the month for your pass Navigo, and it's good for metro, buses, RER system, all of that. And like Miriam said, your employer will reimburse you about 50%, so it really only costs about 30-35 euros for your month's transportation pass.
I'll start with Angers. I was really lucky in that I connected up with a language assistant who had had my schools the year before, and she suggested something called a foyer for me, and that is a foyer pour jeunes travailleurs, for young workers, and it ended up being a really good living situation for me in the position of a language assistant for this temporary period that I was living in France. So the foyer where I lived was all women, but there are co-ed foyers, and also was capped for people aged 18 to 30. Foyers across the country will have different age limits, they'll have different restrictions, so you have to check into that, but that was what the restrictions were in Angers. So I was able to get a studio, which meant that I had my bedroom situation, like a bed, and then the bathroom, and I also had a kitchenette. So I had 2 hobs and a fridge and a sink. But in the foyer, there were also just single rooms that were a bedroom and a bathroom, and you could utilize the communal kitchen. There were also doubles and triples as options. One of the other really big perks that I found with the foyer was that there was a designated person for CAF who worked at the foyer. So this person helped me set up my dossier, apply for CAF the first time, which was great because I didn't know what I was doing and probably would have messed it up. It was just really helpful to have a person there as a liaison. It also meant that I did get my aid for CAF pretty quickly. They have pretty loose leases. So once I signed my lease and put my deposit down and did all of that, it was open-ended, but I only had to give 10 days notice in order to leave, which is very different from entering into a normal lease. And that was one of the big benefits with the language assistant position in particular, because it meant that I had freedom to decide when I wanted to leave the country because I only had to give 10 days notice. I really enjoyed my foyer situation. It worked well with the rent pricing, with my budget once I got CAF, and it was just overall a good living situation. I got to live in Centre-ville. I was just really well located. In Dijon, on the other hand, my living situation has been a little bit different. The school where I teach has what's called an internat, which is residence on campus for students. And the lycée reserved a room for the language assistant. It's a pretty cozy space. I just have my bedroom and my own bathroom. I have a kitchen set up, but it's really a fridge and a microwave and a hot plate that's too high for me to use. The rent is only 90 euros a month, which I would not find a single space of the same size, probably even smaller in Dijon itself for that rent.
Living in a smaller town, for housing, I lived in a studio, actually in the staff building at the school I was teaching at, and I paid about 200 euros a month, including utilities. In smaller towns, the cost for rent is obviously going to be lower. I would budget for about 200 to 400 euros for a studio, and depending again on what you're looking for, so if you want a 1 or 2 bedroom, the location, all those kind of things factor in. If you're specifically interested in Paris, I did a whole video on how I found my housing. I will link it right here.
In terms of grocery shopping and other things like that, Angers and Dijon are pretty similar. The only thing that I find different in Dijon to Angers is the accessibility of corner stores. I live in like the north part of Dijon, so I don't live centre-ville, whereas I lived essentially centre-ville in Angers. And when I was in Angers, there were corner stores everywhere, so I could hop off the bus, and if I was missing something or craving something, I could just hop into a corner store on my way back. Just have to plan out my grocery store trips a little bit more effectively.
So to run errands in a small town is super accessible, within walking distance. I actually loved that fact that I could easily go to the grocery store by foot or grab a baguette on my way home from work. Anything from like getting my hair cut, like meeting a friend at a cafe or a bar, going to my gym, like everything was just so accessible, like 5 to 20 minute walk. However, you do have less options because it is a small town, but again, I was still surprised at the fact that there were still a few options.
Another thing for planning budget is laundry. When I lived in Angers at the foyer, there were laundry facilities in the building, and it was only, I want to say 4 to 5 euros to do a wash and a dry cycle, and they would just tack it onto your rent at the end of the month. In Dijon, on the other hand, I don't have access to laundry facilities on campus, which means I have to go to a laverie, and the closest laverie to me is, you guessed it, a 20-minute walk away. So I always have to kind of plan it out. The other difference with the laverie is that it is unfortunately more expensive than my laundry was at the foyer. So the combination of wash and dry that I do costs me 9.5 euros for a whole cycle. If you find a flat or a place that has a washing machine, will typically not come with a dryer. So not the end of the world. So that's something that I hadn't necessarily thought about budgeting based off of my experience in Angers. And I have to budget a little bit differently for it in Dijon, especially because laveries, at least the laverie where I go, only accepts cash.
Laundry was available to me living at my school. However, if not, there was really only 1 or 2 laundry mats or laveries in my town, and they were about a 20-minute walk. Laveries aren't super common in small towns just because you have more space. So normally, because you have more space, you have a washer at home. Okay, well, a big thank you, a big merci to Miriam for talking about her experiences in a middle to large sized town while living in France. And these were just a few of the big differences between small town and bigger cities. Let us know below if you've experienced any of these. Are there any differences that we missed? And are you currently living in France? For other videos on France, travel, languages, all that kind of stuff, feel free to subscribe, check out my channel if you want. And yeah, so thanks for watching. Merci, bisous.